Folks, I'm not going to show you the whole podcast. I'm not even going to show you a clip from it. We're gonna watch a little bit of Foxy's future ex-husband in a moment. But I want to talk about the 5-4 podcast. That's 5-4 podcast. It's really good. Man, it's good. And they're talking about the Federalist Society. They just started doing this. Do you recall that we said last week that you can trace the origin of these horrible Republican beliefs down to small groups of people doing very sinister things? Well, want to know where you get Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, Clarence Thomas? The answer is the Federalist Society. What happened was, and I'm going to sum up an hour's worth of podcast for you in about 30 seconds. In the 70s, as a reaction to the figure of the heroic lawyer rising up, being a lefty that strikes blows for the little guy, as a reaction to that, a group of conservatives said, how do we counter this? And after some trial and error, what they came up with was the Federalist Society as we know it now. That is a group that exists within law school. Like, it is a club that exists within law school. And it pretends to be a debate club, but that's not the function it serves. The function it serves is this: anybody recommended by them is somebody who will be understood to care more about conservative policy than the law. That means they care more about getting conservative things done, especially socially conservative things done, and, oh, well, what the hell, the standard conservative stuff. You know, having you have lords, having you have oligarchs control your lives. That's what they care more about. They don't care about what the law says. They're like inverted lawyers. They're like the evil mirror universe version of lawyers. When Donald Trump said that his Supreme Court picks would come from a list recommended by the Federalist Society, what he was saying to those who understood the Federalist Society is, don't worry, no matter what they say to get confirmed, this person will be against abortion. This person will be a right-wing sleeper agent, basically. They've been in power with Leonard Leo funding them and being a member, Clarence Thomas doing the same, Ginny Thomas doing the same, for basically my whole life and the vast majority of everybody else's. They've been around for a while and growing in power, but they didn't get truly, really, utterly powerful until the turn of the century, until the 2000s. Now they got 3 members on the Supreme Court. They overturned Roe v. Wade. Federalist Society did. They did this too.
This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, this might seem a little wonky here, but the implications of what just happened are pretty massive. So the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals has refused to reconsider its earlier decision that private parties and voters can't sue to enforce Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So what does it mean for the states that are under the Eighth Circuit?
Yeah, so first of all, you're right. It's wonky, but it's very, very important. And I think it's a lesson that people need to keep in mind, that oftentimes things that look very internal or processy can have enormous consequences on the lives of everyday Americans when it comes to participating in democracy. So there are 7 states. There are 7 states in the Eighth Circuit: Arkansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And what it means is if you're in one of those states right now, you can no longer bring a lawsuit to enforce Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. We have talked about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act as the key that has allowed Black voters to gain additional congressional districts in Louisiana and in Alabama. My team won cases there. We won cases in Georgia. This is a critical part of what makes American democracy work. And in those states now, those 7 states, private citizens and groups can no longer bring those cases. Only the Department of Justice can, and the Department of Justice doesn't have the resources to be bringing every Section 2 case to protect all the voters in the country.
Okay, now looking forward, if we game this out, so right now, to your earlier point, if you are if you live in a state that's under the jurisdiction of the Eighth Circuit, you can no longer bring these cases if you're a private party. Only the DOJ can bring these cases. And
So real quick, does it surprise you? Does it surprise you to find out that Republicans are not interested in the Voting Rights Act being heard, cases involving it being heard in front of a court? Does it not surprise you that Republicans want to take away the people's power, people's ability to bring a case in front of the court? Does that surprise you? Doesn't surprise me. We know who these people are. We know what Republicans are all about. But in case you have somebody in your life who is a, let's say a libertarian-minded person, you might want to bring this to their attention. You might want to say, if you actually believe, you actually believe that the government shouldn't have more power than the people do, maybe you ought to stop voting for Republicans, because they want it to be a world where only the DOJ can bring cases that will defend somebody's right to vote. And the people, they won't be able to do that anymore. That's the reality in the Eighth Circuit. That's multiple states where if your right to vote is illegally taken away, you now are not allowed to complain about it. You're not allowed to get that corrected. That was the ruling that judge did. Can you guess what society that judge is a member of? They want it, the Republicans, they want this case to be taken to the Supreme Court, where there are 4 members of the Federalist Society seated. These are people who, bear in mind, care more about getting Republican values, which is a lack of values, frankly, getting Republican rule established than they do about what the law says. These people shouldn't be in charge of anything.
We'll speak about that in a moment, about the limited resources of the DOJ. But let's say the plaintiffs in this case appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court sides with the Eighth Circuit. Then would it become a national standard that no private parties can sue to enforce Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act?
Yes, and this is what the conservatives want, right? The conservatives want there to be what's called a circuit split. When some circuits rule one way on federal law and some circuits rule another way on federal law, that is one of the most common reasons why the Supreme Court hears a case, right? Supreme Court only hears 60 to 70 cases a year. There are millions of cases filed around the country. Thousands and thousands of them through the courts of appeals try to get to the U.S. Supreme Court. One of the reasons why the Supreme Court takes these cases is because there's a disagreement between circuits. And so conservatives have been floating this idea that there's no private right of action in all of these different circuits. They got one to bite in the Eighth Circuit, and their goal is to bring this to the U.S. Supreme Court, because let's be honest, the Eighth Circuit is important, but when you talk about voting rights and Section 2 of the VRA, you start looking at the Fifth Circuit, the 11th Circuit with Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, the Deep South. And so what they want to do, what the conservatives want to do, is use this circuit split as a way to either get the Eighth Circuit case up there or one of these other circuit cases that's gone the other way. so that the Supreme Court can rule on this with a 6-3 majority. They are hoping the Supreme Court will strike down private rights of action in a nationwide basis, and that would be crippling to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
Well, here's the thing, like, the only people who...
Now let's dwell here for a moment. So we're in a position where if we were to challenge this, we risk losing the ability for a citizen anywhere in the United States to bring such a challenge in front of the court, which is the way it's been done for a very long time now. The entirety of the Voting Rights Act, as a matter of fact. Yet, if we don't challenge it, it is likely to get brought in front of the court anyway by somebody who lost one of these cases previously. Now they can go in front of the Supreme Court and say, well, now wait a minute. They ruled one way with me, but they just ruled the other way in the Eighth Circuit. So we're likely to have it handed to them anyway. We know we are not going to get a fair ruling. After all, Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, how often did you hear these people refer to Roe v. Wade and say, well, that's settled law. Well, now, wait a minute. That's settled law. I'm not interested. I'm here to only call balls and strikes settled law. But they came from Donald Trump's list of recommendations by the Federalist Society. Those recommendations meant these people will say whatever they need to say to take power. They'll say it in any forum. They'll lie under oath, like Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh did. They'll lie under oath. They'll break the law to take power. And then they'll do as we please. So they will. Those criminals who are currently in the highest court in our land, they will take away the ability of a U.S. citizen to defend their own voting rights. But forget all that for a second, because in the meantime, if you are in the Eighth Circuit, your rights have already been taken away. If these Republican governors, the kind that are willing to seize control of border policy from the president, from you and me, people who decided who would be in charge of that, if they're willing to break the law to do that, if they decide, looks like all these folks in this black county can't vote. We just, we decided it was time to clean up the old filing cabinet, and we got rid of all these registered voters, in just the dirty counties, in just the counties that we thought needed cleansing, if you will. Oh, were they black? Were they primarily black? Oh, well. Hey, let me see if the DOJ is going to file anything about that. Do they historically challenge conservatives? Oh, every other governor from the multiple states in the Eighth Circuit just did the same thing? Well, let's see if the DOJ can hear these cases before the November election. Let's see if the DOJ will file multiple cases and hear them before the November election. Very boring, isn't it? The way they take away our rights. Very boring, the way they enact racist policies. I would have thought that the main reason the Voting Rights Act would have been effective is that anybody would be terrified to be found in violation of the Voting Rights Act. Because who would want to look like the sort of person that attacks the voting rights of Americans? Oh, innocent times those were. Republicans would. Because Republicans are evil. Republican governors, if you are a Republican politician currently, you are a villain. You're a terrible human being. If you support Republicans, the best I can say about you currently, that you are duped easily, and I suspect willfully allowed yourself to be. But that's the seriousness of what we're talking about. To tell you what you can do with the power we still have, we better do it, or we won't have it anymore.
Could appeal this are the losers, and that would be the people like the pro-democracy faction. And so wouldn't it be in our best interest now not to appeal to the US Supreme Court, knowing that we risk this being a national standard?
Look, that's probably right. I'm not going to tell the people who brought this case
Right, of
what they
course.
should do or shouldn't do, but there's definitely an argument there. But understand that there are other cases in other circuits where the courts have said there is a private right of action. And the fear is that in those cases where the conservatives have lost, that they may now go to the US Supreme Court and say, Supreme Court, we may have lost in the 5th Circuit, 11th Circuit, but look at the 8th Circuit and there's a split, and therefore we think you should take this case. So even if the pro-voting groups don't bring this case in the 8th Circuit, it's no guarantee that where conservatives lose somewhere else, they won't use it as an opportunity.
Well, no, the Supreme Court itself has already upheld Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act in a number of states, in Louisiana, which we've spoken about at length, in Alabama, which we've spoken about at length. I mean, this is a provision that they uphold over and over again. So would that lend itself to this idea that if it was appealed, that they would rule against the 8th Circuit?
Yeah, look, this is a point that's been made on Democracy Docket in piece after piece, in case page after case page there, that the Supreme Court hasn't just upheld Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act recently. I mean, they've been upholding Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act since it was enacted in 1965. All of the cases we've been talking about for the last 2 years, and by the way, all those cases that go back, 20, 30 years, these are all cases brought by private parties. The vast majority of the cases that are brought by under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act are brought by private parties. And the Supreme Court has never back then or most recently ever said boo about there not being a private right of action. But the concern is that, all of it, we saw this with Dobbs. We've seen this in other cases, that all of a sudden a conservative majority of the Supreme Court waits up and says, oh, wait, we never thought about that before.
You want to know what else they do? Clarence Thomas will float something out there and say, I was sort of wondering about this element of it all, I was wondering about that. He'll put out a think piece saying that. That's not an accident. That's not a trivial thing. That's not a casual comment. What he is saying when he does that is, hey, somebody in the Federalist Society who works who's in Harvard or Yale or whatever, write a little think piece, give a little talk saying why you think this objection I have with the current laws that give people rights is valid, so that I can refer to that when I randomly decide I'm going to strip the rights of Americans away. That's what the Federalist Society exists for. It's a way to get around the law. Couple of things you can do here. Number one, with the immediate, when it comes to the DOJ and all that, God's sake, vote for the Democrats. I don't even like the Democrats. Vote for them anyway. This is defensive voting. You want to make some ground here in your is particularly as local as you can get. Hell, any office that you can, vote for a progressive. Find the progressives, vote for the progressive. That is how we protect against this. We need more literal votes in the House and Senate. We need laws written that make this kind of behavior illegal. But go further. We need to deal with specifically the Federalist Society. Contact your representatives. Link is in the description. Tell them not to confirm anyone who is a member of the Federalist Society. You have good reason for that. This is not what do you call it? The commie hunts of old. There's a pretty darn good reason members of the Federalist Society have demonstrated over and over and over again that they will lie to take power. They have done so. Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh. Look at Clarence Thomas and Leonard Leo. Look at Ginny Thomas. Here's a fun little anecdote. You remember that Vallejo decision that made giving an infinite amount of money via PACs, political action committees? Well, before that passed, before that decision came down, Ginny Thomas and Leonard Leo formed a PAC, Political Action Committee. Right on the eve of that decision. Then the decision was made, and they flooded it with money. How did they know? How did they know? How did they know that decision would come down that way? How could that billionaire and that wife of one of the people making the decision know how that would go? Tell your representatives not to play games. Being a member of the Federalist Society means you don't respect the law and you cannot be trusted with it in any way, shape, or form. Do not allow them in power. Never vote to confirm even one member of the Federalist Society from here on out. Done. Tell that to your representatives. Never again. Tell them you will be watching and mean it. Watch them. Tell them you will not allow them to get your vote if they confirm members. I'm talking for any position, a federal judge, a local judge, a Supreme Court nominee. No, if they're a member of the Federalist Society, they are not welcome in the U.S. court system. Tell that to your representatives. It doesn't just serve the purpose of hopefully getting them to vote this way or that. It makes them aware of what is going on. It makes them aware that you know what's going on, even if they didn't. They need to understand how this game works now. We need to not put up with this anymore. We need to not just see some boring group of fancy people, whatever. I'm sure there's one that's this and another that leans the other way politically. No. This is a group who has the stated intention of making America a right-wing hellscape. And they've gone a great length to it already. Hey, guess what? Americans don't have a right to an abortion anymore. You don't have the right to full control over your own body anymore because of the work these people put in, because of what they do, because specifically of the Federalist Society. So write your representative. Tell them, do not ever vote to confirm somebody who is a member of the Federalist Society. Have them ask whether they are confirming a judge, whatever. Were you a member of the Federalist Society? Yes? That's all I need to hear. That's a no vote from me. Done. It means you're part of a group of people who are fine with lying. Because we learned from Amy Coney Barrett, we learned from Brett Kavanaugh, we learned from Clarence Thomas, we learned from Leonard Leo, we learned from Antonin Scalia. You lie. That's the ethics you have if you're a member of the Federalist Society, and you are not welcome to represent the U.S. court system. We cannot have lefties acting ignorant of these things anymore.